The splash of muddy water hit her dress before she could even turn around. Cold, dirty, heavy. For a second, the world went silent. The pregnant woman stood frozen on the roadside, her hands instinctively moving to protect her belly as brown water dripped from her one-scream dress onto the dusty ground. Her breath caught in her throat. She didn't scream. She didn't curse. She didn't even look angry. She simply closed her eyes. Because the man sitting inside the speeding SUV, the man who laughed as the tires roared past, was the last person she ever expected to see again. Her ex-husband. And he had no idea who she had become. Before I go on, if you're listening to this story during a quiet moment, maybe while driving, cooking, or lying awake at night, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. It reminds me that I'm not telling this story alone. Now let me tell you how everything began. 3 years earlier, Miriam had stood in a very different place. Back then, she wasn't wearing silk, she wasn't carrying a child, and she certainly wasn't married to a billionaire. She was standing in a narrow courtroom hallway, clutching a thin file of divorce papers with shaking hands, while her husband, Daniel, laughed loudly with his friends on the other side of the room. Daniel had always laughed like that, too loud, too confident, like the world owed him something. "Relax," he'd said that day, not even bothering to lower his voice. "You'll be fine. Women always survive. You'll find another fool." Miriam had been pregnant even then, barely 3 months. But Daniel didn't want a child. And worse, he didn't want a wife who had nothing to offer him anymore. When they met, Miriam had been working 2 jobs, helping her widowed mother survive. Daniel loved her humility then, or maybe he loved how small she made herself for him. But once he got a promotion, once his friends started driving better cars and marrying richer women, Miriam became an embarrassment. "She's too quiet. She doesn't fit my future. She's holding me back." Those were the words he used when he finally told her he wanted a divorce. He didn't know she was pregnant when he first asked. And when he found out, he smiled. "Even better," he said. "That makes leaving easier. I don't want baggage." Miriam had signed the papers with tears soaking the ink, not because she wanted to, but because she had nowhere else to go. Her mother had passed away months earlier. The small rented room they lived in was no longer hers. That night, she slept on a bus station bench. Pregnant, alone, forgotten. For weeks, Miriam survived on charity shelters and soup kitchens. Some nights, she cried herself to sleep, whispering apologies to the child inside her belly. "I'm trying," she would say softly. "Please hold on." One rainy evening, exhausted and dizzy, she collapsed outside a private hospital. That collapse changed everything. She woke up in a white room, warm blankets tucked around her, and a nurse gently checking her pulse. "You're safe," the nurse said. "Don't try to move." Later that night, an elderly man entered the room. He wasn't dressed like a doctor. His suit was simple but expensive. His hair was silver, his eyes sharp, observant, and unexpectedly kind. He looked at Miriam for a long time before speaking. "What is your name?" he asked. "Miriam," she whispered. "And this child," he said, glancing at her belly, "does the father know?" Miriam turned her face away. "No." The man nodded slowly, as if he already understood more than she had said. "My name is Samuel Kingsley," he said calmly. "This hospital belongs to me." Miriam tried to sit up, panicked. I can leave. I didn't mean to." "Stay," he said firmly. "You're not a burden." Something in his voice broke her. She cried harder than she ever had before. Over the next few days, Samuel learned everything. The marriage, the betrayal, the abandonment, the pregnancy. What Miriam didn't know was that Samuel Kingsley wasn't just a hospital owner. He was one of the wealthiest men in the country. And he was looking at Miriam with a familiarity that unsettled him. Because she reminded him of someone he had lost a long time ago. Samuel arranged care for Miriam without asking anything in return. A small apartment, medical support, food, security. "You don't owe me," he told her when she hesitated. "One day you'll understand why I'm helping." Months passed. Miriam grew stronger, her belly grew rounder, and her spirit slowly began to heal. She volunteered at the hospital. She studied business online at night. She learned. She listened. She worked. Samuel watched quietly. Then one evening, over tea, he asked her a question that changed her life forever. "Would you marry me?" he said. Miriam nearly dropped the cup. "I'm old enough to be your father," he continued calmly. "This is not about romance. It's about protection, respect, legacy." She stared at him, confused. "I don't want to own you," Samuel said. "I want to give you a name no one can erase, and a future no one can steal." Miriam didn't answer that night. But weeks later, after another reminder of how fragile life could be, she said yes. The wedding was private, quiet, no headlines, no announcements. Just signatures, witnesses, and a promise. Samuel legally adopted her unborn child as his own. The world never noticed. Daniel certainly didn't. To him, Miriam had vanished, just another woman who failed to keep him. And now, 3 years later, as he sat in his shiny SUV laughing with a woman beside him, he didn't recognize the pregnant woman he had just splashed with mud. He didn't see the diamond ring hidden beneath her sleeve. He didn't know that the child she carried would inherit more wealth than he would ever touch. And he had no idea that this small, cruel moment was about to drag his entire life into the light. Miriam opened her eyes slowly. The mud slid down her dress in thick lines, staining the fabric, soaking into the hem. People nearby had stopped walking. Some stared, some whispered. A few shook their heads in quiet sympathy. She didn't look angry. She looked calm. She bent slightly, one hand resting on her belly, the other brushing dirt from her sleeve. Her movements were careful, protective. The baby kicked gently, as if reminding her that she wasn't alone anymore. Across the road, the SUV slowed at a traffic bump. Daniel leaned out of the window, laughing, his voice sharp and careless. "Hey, watch where you're standing," he shouted, still amused by his own cruelty. The woman beside him, young, overdressed, impatient, rolled her eyes. "Why are poor people always on the road?" she muttered. Miriam finally looked up. Her eyes met Daniel's for a brief second. He frowned. Something about her face felt familiar, not enough to recognize her, but enough to make him uncomfortable. She had changed. Her posture was different, stronger, quieter. Her eyes no longer begged for approval. They didn't need anything from him. Daniel scoffed and waved his hand dismissively. "Move next time," he said, then pressed the accelerator. The SUV disappeared in a cloud of dust. Miriam stood there until the road cleared, then slowly crossed to the other side. A black sedan was parked nearby. The driver rushed out the moment he saw her. "Ma'am," he said, panicked. "I'm so sorry, I should have pulled closer. Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Miriam replied softly. He handed her a clean coat from the back seat. She slipped it on without a word. Inside the car, warmth wrapped around her instantly. "Should I call Mr. Kingsley?" the driver asked. Miriam shook her head. "No, he's in a meeting. Let him focus." She looked out the window as the car moved. Her reflection stared back at her, mud-stained dress, tired eyes, but a strength that hadn't existed 3 years ago. She remembered the last time Daniel had looked at her like that. It was the day she packed her clothes into a plastic bag. "You'll regret this," she'd said quietly. Daniel had laughed then too. "Trust me," he replied. "You'll be begging me to take you back." She never did. Daniel's life, on the other hand, hadn't turned out the way he expected. The promotion he once bragged about was gone. The company downsized. He jumped jobs, chasing money that never stayed long enough. The woman beside him in the SUV, Clara, wasn't rich, but she looked rich, and that mattered to him. Appearances always mattered to Daniel. That evening, at a high-end restaurant, Daniel complained loudly while scrolling his phone. "Can you believe people like that?" he said, stabbing his steak. "Standing on the road like beggars, no shame." Clara nodded distractedly. "Did you hear about the Kingsley group dinner tomorrow?" Daniel paused. "Kingsley?" "Yes," she said. "Big charity gala, investors only." Apparently Samuel Kingsley is attending with his wife. Daniel leaned back, interested. "Kingsley, isn't he ancient?" "He is," Clara said. "But rumor says his wife is young. No one knows who she is. She appeared out of nowhere." Daniel smirked. "Smart woman." That name echoed faintly in his head later that night. "Kingsley." He brushed it off. Meanwhile, Miriam stood in front of a mirror in her private suite, warm water washing away the mud. The stain disappeared, but the memory stayed. When she stepped out, Samuel Kingsley was waiting. He looked at her coat, her damp hair, the tightness in her jaw. "What happened?" he asked calmly. Miriam hesitated. Then she told him everything. Samuel listened without interrupting. His expression never changed, but his hands slowly clenched behind his back. "Did he recognize you?" he asked. "No," Miriam replied. "He didn't even look properly." Samuel nodded once. "Good." She looked at him. "Why good?" "Because," he said quietly, "when he finally does, it will be undeniable." Miriam swallowed. "I don't want revenge." Samuel smiled faintly. "Neither do I." He placed a gentle hand over her belly. "I want justice." The next morning, invitations were delivered across the city. Gold lettering, heavy envelopes. Daniel received one too. He stared at it in disbelief. "Kingsley Group Annual Gala," he read aloud. "Exclusive." Clara squealed. "Daniel, this is huge." He straightened his suit in the mirror that night, feeling important for the first time in years. He had no idea that the woman he splashed with mud would be standing on that stage. Not as a guest, but as the reason the room would fall silent. The ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, every surface polished until it reflected wealth back at itself. Daniel stepped inside with Clara clinging to his arm, his chest lifted, his smile practiced. Men in tailored suits nodded at one another. Women in flowing gowns laughed softly, glasses of champagne catching the light. This was his world, or at least the world he wanted people to believe he belonged to. "Act natural," Daniel whispered to Clara. "Don't stare." She laughed nervously. "You're the one sweating." Daniel adjusted his tie. The Kingsley Group logo was everywhere, on banners, menus, even the napkins. He felt small, but excitement drowned the discomfort. If he impressed the right people tonight, everything could change. Across the room, doors opened quietly. Conversations softened. Heads turned. Miriam entered. She wore a deep blue maternity gown that flowed effortlessly around her, elegant without being loud. A subtle diamond ring caught the light when she moved her hand. Her hair was styled simply, her face calm, composed, radiant. She didn't rush. She didn't search the room. She walked as someone who knew exactly where she belonged. Daniel noticed her from across the hall and froze. The room seemed to tilt. His mind raced, struggling to place her. She looked familiar. Too familiar. "That woman," he muttered. Clara followed his gaze. "Which one?" Daniel's throat tightened. "The pregnant one." Clara squinted. "She's stunning, probably married rich." Daniel felt a strange pressure in his chest. Memories surfaced, faded, unwanted. A woman standing quietly behind him. A woman packing silently. A woman he never bothered to look at twice. No. Impossible. Miriam hadn't looked like that. She hadn't walked like that. She hadn't belonged anywhere like this. Before Daniel could think further, a hush swept through the hall. Samuel Kingsley stepped onto the stage. The room rose in respect. He waited, letting the silence stretch, then spoke with calm authority. "Thank you for joining us tonight," he began. This year's gala is special, not because of numbers, not because of profits. His eyes scanned the crowd. But because family is the foundation of everything we build. Daniel felt his palms grow damp. Samuel gestured gently toward the side of the stage. Miriam joined him. Gasps rippled through the room. Samuel placed a protective hand over her back, then over her belly. "My wife," he said clearly, "Miriam Kingsley." Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. "Wife? Kingsley?" The world narrowed. He stared, unblinking, as realization crept in slowly, cruelly. That face. Those eyes. That quiet strength. It was her. The woman he divorced. The woman he abandoned. The woman he splashed with mud. Clara turned to him, confused. "Daniel, what's wrong?" He couldn't answer. Samuel continued, unaware or pretending to be. "And this child," he said warmly, resting his hand over Miriam's belly, "will one day inherit not just wealth but values, dignity, responsibility." The room applauded. Daniel didn't clap. His ears rang. Clara's smile faded as she studied him. "You know her," she said slowly. Daniel swallowed hard. She was my wife." The words sounded unreal. Clara pulled her arm away. "You're joking." "I'm not." Her face drained of color. On stage, Miriam's gaze drifted across the crowd. And then, she saw him. Their eyes met. Time stopped. Miriam didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She simply held his gaze, steady, calm, unafraid. Daniel felt exposed, small, seen in a way he had never allowed before. For the first time, he understood something he never had. She hadn't been weak. She had been patient. The applause faded. People began to move, talk, congratulate. Daniel stood frozen. Then, slowly, Miriam turned away. As if he no longer mattered. Daniel's knees nearly buckled. He knew then, truly knew, that the moment he laughed while splashing her with mud had cost him more than a marriage. It had cost him his place in the world. And the night wasn't over yet. Daniel stood there long after the applause ended, his hands hanging uselessly at his sides. The room buzzed again, laughter, compliments, deals being whispered over crystal glasses. But for him, everything sounded distant, muffled, as if he were underwater. Clara spoke first. "You said she was nothing," she whispered sharply. "You said she disappeared." Daniel's mouth opened, but no words came out. Across the ballroom, Miriam moved gracefully among the guests. Executives leaned in to greet her. Women smiled politely, some with envy, others with curiosity. She listened more than she spoke, her hand resting protectively over her belly, Samuel always close enough to offer quiet reassurance without overshadowing her. Daniel watched every step she took. That used to be his wife. The woman he once told to find another fool. The woman he once abandoned without hesitation. Now she wore a name that opened every door he had ever begged to enter. Clara yanked his sleeve. "Daniel, I need air." They stepped onto the balcony, city lights glittering below. The cold night wind cut through Daniel's suit, but he barely felt it. "You lied to me," Clara said, folding her arms. "You said your past didn't matter." "It until now," Daniel snapped, then softened his tone. "I didn't know this would happen." Clara laughed bitterly. "You didn't know she'd become powerful." Daniel looked away. Inside, Samuel leaned close to Miriam. "Are you all right?" She nodded. "I am." "You recognized him," Samuel said gently. "Yes." "Do you want to leave?" Miriam shook her head. "No, running is what I used to do. I won't anymore." Samuel studied her for a moment, then smiled. "Good." Not long after, a waiter approached Daniel. "Mr. Daniel Carter," he asked politely. "Yes." "You're requested in the private lounge." Daniel's stomach dropped. He followed, his steps heavy. The lounge was quieter, dimly lit, luxurious in a way that felt intimidating rather than comforting. Samuel stood near the window. Miriam sat nearby, calm, composed. Daniel froze at the door. Samuel turned. "Come in." Daniel stepped forward, every memory rushing back arguments, laughter, cruelty, indifference. I didn't know," Daniel began, his voice unsteady. "If I had known." Miriam raised her hand slightly. He stopped. "You didn't know," she said calmly, "and that's exactly why this conversation matters." Daniel swallowed. "You look happy." "I am safe," she corrected. "That's different." Samuel spoke next, his voice low but firm. "Daniel, you abandoned my wife while she was pregnant. You mocked her. You dismissed her value." Daniel lowered his head. "I made a mistake." "No," Miriam said softly. "You made a choice." Silence filled the room. Daniel's shoulders sagged. "What do you want from me?" Miriam looked at him for a long moment. "I don't want anything," she said. "But you came here thinking this room was yours to enter. It is." Samuel stepped forward. "This gala is about responsibility, about who we lift and who we discard." Daniel felt his throat tighten. "You're not being punished," Samuel continued. "You're being revealed." Daniel nodded slowly. Outside the lounge, whispers had begun to spread. People noticed his absence. Questions formed. Samuel opened the door. "Return to the party," he said. "But understand this, your future depends on how you leave tonight." Daniel walked back into the ballroom, feeling smaller than he ever had. Clara watched him approach. "What did they say?" "That I don't belong in their world," he replied quietly. She scoffed. "Maybe you never did." Miriam, from across the room, watched him one last time. Not with anger. With closure. And for Daniel, that hurt more than any punishment ever could. Daniel left the ballroom before dessert was served. Not because he was asked to. Because he couldn't breathe. The laughter, the music, the clinking of glasses, all of it pressed down on his chest like a weight. As he stepped into the cool night air, he realized something that made his hands tremble. For the first time in his life, he wasn't invisible because he was poor. He was invisible because he was irrelevant. Clara didn't follow him. She had stayed behind, already scanning the room for someone more promising, someone whose name carried more weight than his ever would. Daniel watched through the glass doors as she laughed with another man, an investor he recognized from a magazine cover. He turned away. On the drive home, memories attacked him one by one. Miriam packing quietly. Miriam standing in the rain. Miriam's eyes when he told her she was holding him back. And now, Miriam on a stage, carrying a future he had thrown away. The next morning, Daniel woke to missed calls. One from his manager. Two from unknown numbers. A dozen messages in his inbox. He opened the first email. "We regret to inform you that your application has been withdrawn." Another. "After careful consideration, we've decided to move in a different direction." Then a text from his manager. "Call me, now." Daniel's heart pounded as he dialed. "Daniel," the manager said coldly, "what did you do last night?" "I attended a gala," Daniel replied cautiously. "Did you insult someone?" "No." "Did you anger someone powerful?" Daniel hesitated. There was silence on the line. Then the manager exhaled sharply. "Your name came up this morning. Investors are nervous. They don't want to be associated with instability." "Instability," Daniel echoed. "Personal history," the manager clarified. "Abandonment, character concerns." Daniel sank onto the edge of the bed. The call ended. Meanwhile, Miriam sat in the sunlit breakfast room of her home, sipping tea. Samuel read the paper quietly across from her. She noticed a headline. "Kingsley Group expands family welfare initiative." Samuel glanced up. "You look distracted." "Just thinking," Miriam replied. "About him." She nodded slowly. "I didn't expect it to hurt." Samuel folded the paper. Healing isn't linear. Miriam placed her hand over her belly. I don't want my child to grow up angry. Then teach them truth, Samuel said gently, not resentment. Later that day, Miriam visited the hospital where she once collapsed. Nurses greeted her warmly. Some didn't recognize her at first. Do you remember me? She asked one young nurse. The nurse squinted, then gasped. You're the woman from the bench. Miriam smiled. I am. She donated quietly. No cameras, no speeches. Just gratitude. Across the city, Daniel sat alone in his apartment, scrolling through social media. Photos from the gala were everywhere. Samuel smiling. Miriam glowing. Headlines praising the mysterious Mrs. Kingsley. Daniel closed his eyes. For the first time, he wondered what kind of father he could have been. Not wealthy. Just present. That night, Daniel stood at his window, watching the city lights flicker. He had chased status his entire life, and lost everything that mattered. Miriam, meanwhile, stood on her balcony, breathing in the night air, her hand resting on the life growing inside her. She whispered softly, We're safe. And for the first time, she truly believed it. Daniel stopped going out. Days passed where the only sound in his apartment was the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of a cheap wall clock. He sent resumes. He made calls. He waited. Nothing came back. People who once laughed at his jokes now replied with silence or polite distance. The same friends who had celebrated his divorce suddenly had meetings and travel whenever he asked to meet. He began to understand something he never had before. Connections were not loyalty. They were convenience. One afternoon, his phone rang. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Daniel Carter, a calm female voice asked. Yes. This is from the Kingsley Group legal office. Daniel's heart skipped. Yes. We'd like to confirm something regarding a past marriage to a woman named Miriam Hayes. His mouth went dry. Yes. Were you legally married to her 3 years ago? Yes. Did you file for divorce while she was pregnant? Daniel closed his eyes. Yes. Silence. Then, thank you, that's all. The line went dead. Daniel stared at the phone. Fear crept in, not panic, but something deeper. Accountability. Meanwhile, Miriam sat with her doctor, reviewing reports. Everything looks good, the doctor smiled. Strong heartbeat, very healthy. Miriam exhaled in relief. Samuel waited outside, speaking quietly with the physician afterward. She's doing well, the doctor assured him. Low stress is key. Samuel nodded. She won't be disturbed. At home, Miriam rested, reading letters from women who had heard her story, not the full truth, just whispers, messages of survival, gratitude, hope. She replied to none publicly. But every letter stayed with her. That evening, Samuel joined her in the garden. You're not responsible for his collapse, he said gently. I know, Miriam replied, but I was responsible for my silence back then. Samuel raised an eyebrow. Silence isn't weakness, sometimes it's survival. Daniel, on the other hand, was spiraling. He visited his old office building one last time, hopping to speak to someone, anyone. Security stopped him at the door. I used to work here, Daniel insisted. The guard shrugged. Not anymore. Humiliation burned his chest. On his way home, rain began to fall. He stepped into a cafe to wait it out. At a nearby table, 2 men spoke quietly. Did you hear about that guy? One said. Divorced a pregnant woman. Turns out she married Kingsley. The other whistled. That's brutal. Daniel stood up abruptly and left. Outside, rain soaked through his jacket. He remembered another rainy day. Miriam standing silently as he turned away. He had thought nothing of it. Now the memory felt unbearable. At home, he opened an old drawer. Inside were photos he had never thrown away. Miriam smiling shyly. Miriam cooking. Miriam sleeping on the couch with a book on her chest. He sat on the floor and cried. Not because he was poor, not because he lost status, but because he finally understood what he had destroyed. Across the city, Miriam lay in bed, Samuel sitting nearby. "Do you regret marrying me?" he asked quietly. She turned toward him. "No, you didn't save me. You respected me." Samuel smiled. And somewhere between regret and consequence, Daniel learned a truth too late. Some doors don't close loudly. They close gently and never reopen. The letter arrived on a Monday morning. Daniel noticed it immediately because it didn't look like the others. No advertisements, no rejection notice, thick paper, clean envelope, his name typed neatly on the front. He stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was a single page. Not legal threats. Not demands. Not accusations. Just facts. It informed him that a trust had been established in the name of the unborn child he once helped create and then abandoned. The trust did not require his involvement. It did not request his signature. It did not expect anything from him. But it did include one line that made his hands shake. "You will not be contacted again." Daniel sat down slowly. This wasn't punishment. This was erasure. He realized then that Miriam wasn't trying to destroy him. She wasn't seeking revenge or compensation or acknowledgement. She was building a future that did not include him at all. And that hurt more than any courtroom loss. Across the city, Miriam sat with Samuel's legal advisor, listening quietly. "You did the right thing," the advisor said. "Everything is protected." Miriam nodded. "I don't want him near my child." Understood. After the meeting, Samuel walked beside her through the hallway. "You're sure?" he asked. "Once this is finalized, there's no turning back." Miriam placed her hand over her belly. "I spent too long begging someone to see my worth," she said softly. "My child will never have to do that." Samuel squeezed her hand, proud but careful not to say it aloud. That afternoon, Miriam visited the small shelter where she had once slept. The building hadn't changed. The smell of soup and detergent felt painfully familiar. A young pregnant woman sat on a bench, eyes tired, clothes worn thin. Miriam stopped. She saw herself. She sat beside the woman, without introducing herself. "It gets better," Miriam said gently. The woman scoffed weakly. "Everyone says that." Miriam smiled. "Then let me show you." She didn't mention names, she didn't mention money, she simply arranged help, housing, medical care, counseling. When she left, the woman stared after her, confused but hopeful. Meanwhile, Daniel packed boxes. Not because he wanted to move. Because he had to. Rent overdue, savings gone, pride long buried. As he taped one final box shut, his phone buzzed. A message from his mother. "I saw her on the news." Daniel closed his eyes. "She looked happy," the message continued. "I'm glad someone protected her." He didn't reply. For the first time, even his own family wasn't on his side. That night, Daniel walked past a playground. Children laughed, parents watched. He stood at a distance, hands in his pockets, invisible again, but this time he understood why. You don't lose a family in one moment. You lose it slowly, through choices you refuse to question. Miriam stood by her bedroom window, watching the city lights glow. She wasn't celebrating. She wasn't bitter. She was at peace. And peace, she had learned, was the loudest victory of all. The baby arrived on a quiet morning, just before sunrise. No sirens, no chaos, just soft light through the hospital windows and the steady rhythm of Miriam's breathing. Samuel stood beside her the entire time, calm, grounded, present in a way no one had ever been for her before. When the cry finally filled the room, Miriam's tears came freely. Not from pain. From release. The nurse placed the baby in her arms, warm and perfect. Miriam studied every tiny detail, the fingers, the eyelashes, the way the child's chest rose and fell. "You're safe," she whispered. "You're so safe." Samuel smiled, his voice thick with emotion. "Welcome to the world." News traveled quietly but quickly. The Kingsleys welcomed a child. No photos were released, no interviews given, but within certain circles the message was clear: the future was secure. Meanwhile, Daniel learned about the birth from a coworker at his new temporary job. "They say Kingsley's kid was born," the man said casually, scrolling his phone. "Lucky child." Daniel nodded, pretending not to care. But that night, alone in his small rented room, the weight of it crushed him. His child. Alive, healthy, loved. And he would never hold them. He took out his phone and typed a message. Deleted it. Typed again. Deleted again. In the end, he locked the phone away. Some bridges weren't meant to be crossed twice. Weeks passed. Miriam adjusted to motherhood with quiet determination. Sleepless nights, gentle smiles, learning a new rhythm of life. Samuel watched with admiration. "You're stronger than you know," he told her one evening as she rocked the baby. She smiled softly. "I learned strength when I had no choice." Daniel, on the other hand, struggled to adjust to obscurity. He worked late hours, avoided conversations, kept his head down. One afternoon, as he left work, rain poured suddenly from the sky. He stood under an awning, watching muddy water splash across the road as cars sped past. A memory struck him like lightning. The roadside. The puddle. The woman protecting her belly. For the first time, he felt the moment fully. Not as humor. As cruelty. He whispered into the rain, "I'm sorry." The apology went nowhere. Miriam took the baby for their first walk in the garden. Sunlight filtered through the trees. She breathed deeply, feeling something new settle in her chest. Closure. Not because Daniel had suffered, but because she no longer carried him inside her. That evening, she spoke to Samuel. "I want our child to know where they come from," she said, "but not be shaped by it." Samuel nodded. "We'll tell them the truth when they're ready." "And love them enough," Miriam added, "that the truth never feels like a wound." Far away, Daniel folded laundry in silence. Life had become smaller, quieter, but clearer. And he understood now. The splash of mud hadn't stained Miriam. It had marked him. Years passed quietly. Not in headlines, not in scandals. Just in time. Miriam's child grew surrounded by calm voices, warm arms, and the kind of security that doesn't need to announce itself. The Kingsley home was large, but it never felt empty. Laughter echoed through the halls. Toys were scattered without complaint. Samuel, despite his age, made time every evening, reading stories, asking questions, listening. Miriam watched it all with a quiet gratitude that never faded. She never spoke Daniel's name. Not because it hurt, but because it no longer mattered. One afternoon, during a charity visit to a community center, Miriam paused near the entrance. Outside, traffic moved slowly after a rainstorm. Puddles lined the road. A car sped past. Mud splashed onto the pavement, just missing her shoes. She flinched for half a second, then smiled. The moment passed. Inside the center, children ran toward her, calling her name. She knelt, arms open, fully present again. Across the city, Daniel's life had settled into something modest. Not miserable, just ordinary. He rented a small apartment near his workplace, paid his bills, went home alone. On weekends, he volunteered at a local repair shop, fixing broken things for people who couldn't afford replacements. No one there knew his past. And for the first time, he didn't need them to. One evening, an elderly woman handed him a cup of tea after he fixed her heater. "You're a good man," she said kindly. Daniel swallowed. "I'm trying to be," he replied. At night, he sometimes dreamed of a child laughing. He never chased the dream. He let it pass. Miriam's child asked questions as they grew. Why is Grandpa Samuel older than other dads? Miriam smiled, because families come in many forms. And my other father, the child asked once innocently. Miriam paused, then answered truthfully, but gently. He wasn't ready to love the right way, so life chose differently. The child nodded, satisfied. Love, they had learned, was not absence. It was presence. Years later, Daniel saw them again. From a distance. At an airport. Miriam walked ahead, confident, composed. Samuel followed beside her. Between them, the child laughed, pulling at Samuel's hand. Daniel stood still as the world moved around him. Miriam did not see him. And for the first time, Daniel was grateful. He smiled, not with bitterness but acceptance. Some stories don't end with reunions. They end with understanding. The last time Daniel thought about the splash of mud, it was no longer with shame alone. It was with clarity. He stood one evening at the edge of the same road where it had happened years earlier. The city had changed, new lights, new signs, but the puddles still formed after rain, still waited quietly for careless tires. Daniel watched cars pass, some slowed, some didn't. He understood now that moments don't become mistakes because they're small. They become mistakes because they reveal who we are when we think no one important is watching. He turned and walked away, choosing a different street. Across the city, Miriam sat on a garden bench, her child curled against her side, counting stars that blinked into the evening sky. Samuel sat nearby, content, silent, letting the moment belong to them. Mom, the child asked softly, do people always get what they deserve? Miriam thought for a moment. No, she said honestly, but they do get what they choose to become. The child nodded, satisfied, and rested their head on her shoulder. Miriam looked up at the sky, feeling the quiet fullness of a life reclaimed, not by anger, not by revenge, but by courage. She had been broken once, left behind, treated as invisible. But she had never been worthless. The mud had washed away long ago. What remained was strength, love, and a future that did not ask permission to exist. Somewhere else, Daniel locked up the shop where he worked, flipped off the lights, and headed home. His life was simple now, honest, small perhaps, but real. He no longer chased reflections of success. He fixed what he could. He showed up. And that was enough. Because not every story needs a dramatic punishment. Some end quietly, with lessons learned too late, and peace found just in time. If this story stayed with you, please tap like to support the channel, subscribe so you don't miss the next stories, and share it with someone who believes healing is louder than revenge.